All right, so today we're going to jump into something pretty huge. We're looking at how one text breaks down three major economic philosophies: capitalism, socialism, and Islam. And really, it's all about how each one tries to answer a massive, fundamental question that every society has to deal with. And what is that big question? It's this: do we prioritize individual freedom, or do we focus on the good of the whole group? Is it even possible to have both, or do we have to choose? The text we're digging into sees this as the central conflict, so let's see how it lays out the different answers. Okay, so first up on the docket is capitalism. The source we're looking at kind of sets it up as the starting point, the main thesis, if you will, and it frames it as an engine that runs on one thing above all else: pure individual self-interest. So what's the core idea here? According to our source, it all boils down to this: a belief in absolute, total, individual ownership. Basically, what's yours is yours. End of story. You have complete, unrestricted power to do whatever you want with your wealth to get ahead. And this is where it gets interesting. The text uses a pretty strong word for the system's driving force: selfishness. Now, it's not really meant as an insult, you know? It's more like a mechanical description. The core assumption is that if every single person just chases their own profit, somehow society as a whole will benefit in the end. But, and this is a big but, the text argues this whole viewpoint just completely ignores the moral side of the equation. So if that's the engine, what are the results? Well, according to this text, these are the outcomes it sees as pretty much inevitable. The argument goes like this: without any real checks and balances, all the wealth starts to pile up at the very top. This creates a huge class divide, and that, the source suggests, leads to things like exploitation and a society where that spirit of cooperation and sympathy just, well, it erodes. All right, so if that's the problem, what's the proposed solution? This is where our source introduces a really powerful counter-idea. It presents socialism not just as another option, but as a direct, all-out reaction to capitalism. Yeah, this really lays it out in black and white, doesn't it? You can see the sharp contrast the text is drawing. If capitalism is all about absolute individual ownership, socialism is framed as swinging the pendulum to the complete opposite extreme, getting rid of individual ownership entirely. It's almost presented as a cure that was literally born from the disease it's trying to fight. So, how does that work in practice? In the socialist system described in our text, individuals don't own the big stuff. Factories, resources, you name it. It all belongs to the state, to the collective. The idea is you work for the group, and in return, the state gives you what it decides you need. But here's the twist, the big critique that the source levels against this system. And this quote really sums it up. The argument is that, hey, in trying to get rid of the tyranny of the super rich, this system just creates a new, even bigger tyrant: the state itself. And, you guessed it, this leads to a whole new set of problems. The source argues that when you take away the chance for personal profit and ownership, you're also taking away the natural motivation for people to work hard, to innovate, to really push themselves. Individual freedom gets sacrificed for the collective, and the text claims the system often needs force to keep running because it's fighting against what it calls basic human nature. Okay, so let's recap. On one hand, we've got a system that champions the absolute individual. On the other, a system that champions the absolute collective. Two extremes. So what now? Well, this is where the source material brings in a third way, presenting the Islamic system as a kind of synthesis, a middle path that tries to find a balance between the two. And the key word here, according to the text's argument, is nuance. See, it says that, unlike socialism, this system absolutely affirms your right to own private property. But, and this is the important part, unlike capitalism, that right isn't absolute. It comes with some strings attached, you could say. There are moral and legal duties built in to make sure the community as a whole is protected. So how does it actually do that? The text breaks it down into four key mechanisms. First, you have the right to own things. Second, it draws some clear moral lines about how you can earn and spend your money. You know, what's allowed, or halal, versus what's forbidden, haram. Third, it actually mandates giving back to society through zakat. And fourth, it straight up bans practices it sees as exploitative, like charging interest or hoarding essential goods. All right, we've looked at each of these systems on their own. Now for the fun part. Let's put them all side by side on the scales and really see how they compare, according to our source material. This chart really just lays it all out, doesn't it? It perfectly sums up the core differences the source is highlighting. When you look at property, you see the full spectrum, absolute to none to limited. For the driving force, you see the contrast between pure self-interest, a state mandate, and then personal gain that's guided by a moral compass. And the outcomes and mechanisms? They're shown as the direct result of these core beliefs. It really brings the whole argument together in one shot. When you get right down to it, the whole argument we've been exploring in this text really boils down to a timeless challenge, doesn't it? It's this constant search for balance between our own individual drives and the needs of the community we live in. And this is probably the best analogy the text uses to explain that third path. It's the idea of speed limits. Think about it. The goal isn't to stop the race, to stop economic competition altogether. It's about putting rules in place to make sure the race is fair, to prevent the most powerful from just running everyone else off the road. And all of this leaves us with one last really big question to chew on. The source we've walked through presents its own proposed solution, of course, but the problem it's trying to solve is universal. So here it is. Can any single system, any single framework, ever create a perfect, lasting balance between the messy complexities of human nature and our deep-seated desire for economic justice? Now that is something to think about.